But I also want to say that the Tal el-Hammam city-state, in the Bible it's called Eretz HaKikar, or Ha'eretz HaKikar, and the land of the disc. And in the Egyptian text, we now have clearly identified it as the place called Shutu. It occupied the best watered agricultural land in the southern Levant. It was essentially impervious to climate fluctuations, which is why in Genesis 13, the writer says it is watered like Egypt. It is watered like Egypt. It doesn't need rain. It has groundwater and, of course, a lot of spring water because it said it was watered like Eden as well. So it remained a city-state through the intermediate Bronze Age. What's interesting about that is that in that part of the world, about 2500 BC, at the end of the early Bronze Age, all the city-states, in fact, most of the towns and villages then collapsed. They just went belly up. Talking about the area of what today would be Israel and Jordan. That whole southern Levantine area went belly up, except for one place. The Kikar cities, anchored by Tal el-Hammam as the central core urban center, fortified urban center, remained. In fact, it even grew during this period. Why? Because this collapse of civilization in 2500 BC was due to climate change. It was a shift in the climate that really brought down the civilizations across the entire Near East and really disrupted things, even in Egypt. And so Tal el-Hammam survived all of this. In fact, it grew somewhat during this period. Why? Because it didn't need rain. You had the Jordan River, you had the perennial rivers coming in on both sides of the site, fed by springs, and so it was a well-watered landscape, and it survived. By the way, it was operating for over 10,000 years. All the way back to the early part of the pre-pottery Neolithic period. We know we had pottery Neolithic, but we also suspect, like Jericho across the river, that we also had the pre-pottery Neolithic. So this is a really, really old, continuously occupied site, never destroyed to create it was destroyed a couple times, I'll show you that, but to create a hiatus, no. There was no occupational gap anywhere in the history of the site. Civilization thrived for 10,000 years, and I noted that the Egyptians called it Shutu. Now, linguistically, and that's where my brain is, linguistically, Shutu can also be rendered Sudu. Is it starting to sound familiar? Okay, this is an Egyptian text. So Genesis preserves that same linguistic formula as Sodom. Now, where does the mem comes from? This is the nominative mem that's introduced on the ends of words in the Semitic set of languages, Egyptian being an agglutinative set of language. And so when you move from Egyptian to Hebrew in the Bible, it becomes Sudum or Sodom. And so you can see the similarity. But in 1700 BC, after thriving for thousands of years uninterrupted when other civilizations crashed, it did not. In 1700 BC, at a time when all the other civilizations surrounding it did not collapse, they were doing just fine on into the late Bronze Age. When they all did fine in 1700 BC, every site on this piece of real estate that you're looking at here, northeast of the Dead Sea, went belly up in an instant. This was not gradual. It was snuffed out, site to site to site, all at one time. That's a little strange. Well, the Bible describes it in Genesis 19 as fire, Goprit va'esh, from Yahweh out of the Shemayim, out of the heavens, toasted in an instant. And we always said, even before I even ever heard the word airburst, long time ago, 30 years ago, we thought, this is a cosmic event. Something meteoritic, something comet planetary something. But this is coming from out of the sky. And we knew that, but we didn't know how to connect it. We didn't know how to look at it scientifically. But when we got involved in the excavation and began to see what we saw, then something else began to happen. In Egyptian, by the way, prior to 1700 BC, it's known by the Egyptians, this area, as Shutu. After 1700 BC, the Egyptians changed the name of this area to Abel. You could say Abel, but ancient languages don't have vowels, so you just sort of throw them in there. They don't represent vowels. Abel. You know what Abel means in Egyptian? It means to mourn a catastrophe. They changed the name from Shutu after 1700 BC to Abel. Why? Because this area was absolutely destroyed and taken offline around 1700 BC. In the Torah, in the Bible, it also calls this area, in the story of Joseph and the story of Moses and Joshua, Abel. And in Hebrew, it means to mourn, or a place of mourning. Same thing, to mourn a catastrophe. This is no coincidence. All this hooks up. The event was so destructive that the area, and this is coming from the archaeology, with which we are intimately involved in this area. Archaeology says that from the moment of that event, this area remained completely denuded of settlements, of occupation for the next 700 years. 700 years. Now, what's interesting about that is this is the best watered agricultural area in the region, probably in the entire southern Levant. It survived the southern Levantine collapse, remember? Because it had great water resources. Why all of a sudden is it gone and it can't regenerate itself for 700 years? The water didn't go away. The defensible high ground you need for making a city, defensible city, didn't go away. What went away? Soil. Even the soil on the landscape was denuded. And if you go back to Genesis 19, what it says is it destroyed the cities, it destroyed the people, every living thing, and all of the vegetation upon the ground. It fried all of it. And so 700 years, according to soil science, in an area like this, when you start building soil from zero, it takes, in this area, 700 years to regenerate the soil so that you can begin to grow something like barley.